There comes a moment, rare, uninvited, and yet intimately familiar, when the world around you seems to ripple, as though reality itself has inhaled and is holding its breath. In that suspended instant, something in you recognizes the faint hum beneath the machinery of daily life. It is the hum of the unseen architecture, the scaffolding upon which your every thought, every belief, every identity is draped like fabric. Most people hear it and dismiss it as imagination, a trick of the mind, the way a dream resists your attempts to remember it upon waking. But for a few, that hum is the beginning of an unraveling, the thread that, when pulled, begins to collapse the entire structure you once called the real world. The Matrix has become a familiar metaphor, thanks to films, books, and whispered conspiracies. But it is not merely a cinematic fantasy. The Matrix is an ancient symbol for the web of perceptions and programmed interpretations that masquerade as truth. It is not built of wires and steel, but of agreements, stories, unquestioned assumptions, and inherited definitions. From the moment you were born, this lattice of thought and perception was woven around you, shaping not only how you see the world, but how you see yourself. And yet, it is so skillfully designed, so artfully immersive, that to question it feels like madness. After all, how can you question the very stage upon which your life unfolds? But there is a single realization, a seed of awareness so simple, so devastating, that once it blooms within you, the entire construct trembles. It is not a complicated doctrine or a secret encrypted in some ancient language. It is a shift in the center of your seeing, the sudden recognition that you have mistaken the painted scenery for the infinite sky. This realization does not add something new to your mind. Rather, it removes what was never yours to begin with. It is a remembering, as if you had been looking at a puzzle all your life, only to realize that you were the one who scattered the pieces in the first place. Imagine for a moment that you are sitting in a vast theater. The play is elaborate, filled with drama, comedy, and heartbreak. You are so engrossed that you forget you bought a ticket, that you walked in from the bright daylight outside. You identify with the characters, take their fates personally, and respond to their joys and tragedies as if they were your own. And then, perhaps through an unexpected turn in the script, you notice something odd, a flicker in the scenery, a shadow moving where there should be none. It is the faintest hint that what you are watching is not the totality of existence. The curtain begins to loosen its grip, and for the first time, you glimpse the stagehands, the ropes, the false backdrop. Your heart races, not with fear, but with an electric anticipation. If this is not real, then what is? This realization is not about cynicism or disillusionment. It is not a rejection of life, but an opening to its deeper layers. To collapse the matrix is not to destroy the world you know. It is to dissolve the unquestioned belief that it is all there is. The matrix feeds on certainty, on your unbroken commitment to the idea that things are exactly as they appear. It is sustained by the repetition of patterns, the unconscious cycles of reaction and desire. But when awareness penetrates those patterns, when you catch the design in the act of designing itself, you reclaim a power that has always been yours, the power to see, to choose, to create from the core of your being rather than from the scripts handed to you. And yet, the paradox is beautiful, because nothing actually changes, and yet everything does. The streets, the sky, the familiar faces all remain, but you perceive them differently. The heaviness of unquestioned meaning evaporates, and the world becomes lighter, more fluid, more alive. You realize that the rules were only as real as your agreement with them, that the boundaries were drawn in chalk, not stone. Life reveals itself as a dynamic, living artwork in which you are both participant and painter, both the wave and the ocean. Still, this realization is not a comfortable awakening. Comfort is the domain of the dream. Awakening can be disruptive, even disorienting. The matrix will not collapse quietly. It will attempt to reassert itself through doubt, fear, and the seduction of old identities. Friends may look at you strangely, sensing a change they cannot name. The routines of your life may feel suddenly hollow. You may grieve for the person you thought you were, for the solidity of a world that now feels transparent. But within that grief is an exhilaration, the sense that you are standing at the threshold of something vast, mysterious, and exquisitely real. The one realization that collapses the matrix is not an answer. It is a question so profound that it dissolves every false answer you have ever accepted. It is the recognition that you are not inside the matrix, nor outside of it, but that the matrix exists within you, a projection of the mind's constructs upon the infinite canvas of awareness. When you see this, you cannot go back to sleep entirely. You may drift into the dream again, but something in you will always remember the taste of that first breath beyond the program. In the chapters that follow, we will explore this realization not as a theory, but as a living experience, a shift that touches philosophy, spirituality, psychology, and the very way you inhabit your daily life. We will unravel its core themes, journey through symbolic narratives that have echoed in ancient traditions, and finally ground it in the texture of everyday reality. By the end, my hope is not that you will adopt a new belief, but that you will stand in the space beyond belief, where the sky is not a painted backdrop, but an endless horizon, waiting for you to see it again for the first time. If the introduction was the moment you first sensed a flicker in the scenery, then here is where we step closer, examining the structure of the stage itself. The matrix is not some distant external machine humming in a far-off sterile chamber. It is intimate. It is stitched into your perceptions, woven through the language you speak, and embedded in the reflexes you inherited from countless generations before you. It is less like a prison built of iron bars and more like a finely tuned symphony that you were born into, a song so constant that you mistake it for silence. The core of this one realization is the piercing awareness that the matrix is not out there in the same way a building or a government exists. It is a mirror made of thought, emotion, memory, and agreement, reflecting back to you the limitations you unconsciously impose on yourself. The buildings you walk past, the money you exchange, the names you use to identify yourself and others, all of them are part of a shared hallucination. The rules of this hallucination are sustained not by any objective law, but by the collective choice to keep agreeing to them. It is, at its heart, a consensual reality, until you stop consenting. What makes this realization so destabilizing is that it calls into question the very ground you stand on. We are taught to trust the evidence of our senses, but those senses are not neutral. They are instruments with settings and filters inherited from culture, family, history, and even the subtle architecture of the brain. Two people can stand in the same place and perceive two completely different worlds, because each is wearing a different lens. This is the first crack in the wall, the understanding that reality as you experience it is not reality as it is. From here, another layer of the illusion becomes visible. The matrix thrives on identification, on your belief that you are the character you've been playing. You have a name, a history, preferences, wounds, desires. All of these feel deeply personal, but they are costumes in the grand play. They have been shaped not only by your experiences, but by the interpretations others offered you. A teacher once called you smart, and you wore that label like armor. A parent once called you lazy, and you carried that burden into adulthood. You see yourself through the accumulated reflections of others, forgetting that the original self is beyond any reflection at all. In spiritual traditions across the world, from the Advaita Vedanta of India to the Gnostic teachings hidden in fragments of ancient scripture, there is a recurring theme. The world, as you perceive it, is a dream, and the dreamer is not the character within it, but the awareness in which it unfolds. This is not metaphor in the poetic sense. It is a literal description of the mechanics of perception. When you grasp this, not as an intellectual idea, but as a direct, undeniable knowing, the matrix begins to lose its solidity. The dream becomes lucid. This lucidity reveals another truth. The illusion is not inherently evil or malicious. Many imagine the Matrix as a hostile prison designed by a malevolent force, but in its purest form, it is a kind of cosmic game. Consciousness dreams itself into limitation to experience the joy and challenge of remembering its own infinity. The struggle, the forgetting, the rediscovery, all are part of the design. The tragedy is not that the Matrix exists, but that so many wander through it unaware that they are players in a dream of their own making. The collapse we speak of is not the destruction of the dream, but the collapse of its tyranny over you. When you recognize that the structures of society, identity, and even time itself are constructs, you are no longer a pawn moved by unseen hands. You can step into the role of the dreamer, the author, the one who can re-script reality from the inside. This is the great secret that mystics, shamans, and awakened teachers have hinted at for millennia. And it is dangerous, not because it harms you, but because it liberates you from the systems that profit from your unawareness. And yet, this liberation requires a sacrifice, the death of certainty. The Matrix provides the comfort of fixed rules, familiar roles, and the illusion of permanence. To awaken is to trade the security of that stability for the exhilarating, sometimes frightening openness of infinite possibility. You lose the certainty of knowing who you are, but you gain the truth that you are, and that this beingness is boundless, uncontainable. The one realization that collapses the Matrix, then, could be phrased in many ways. But perhaps the most piercing is this: you are not inside reality. Reality is inside you. Everything you experience is filtered through your awareness, shaped by your consciousness. Change the consciousness, and the reality shifts to match it. This is the lever that moves worlds, the hidden architecture behind manifestation, synchronicity, and the miracles that seem to arrive from nowhere. And as you begin to live from this awareness, subtle changes occur. You speak differently, listen differently, choose differently. The noise of the Matrix, the endless push and pull of fears and desires, becomes less convincing. You begin to notice the gaps between thoughts, the stillness behind the movement, the eternal backdrop against which all of life's scenes are projected. And in that stillness, you recognize the truth that was there all along. Nothing in the dream can touch what you truly are. This is not the end of the journey. It is, in fact, the beginning. To collapse the Matrix is not to leave the world, but to re-enter it with eyes wide open, to walk among the illusions knowing they are illusions, to play the game while never forgetting that it is a game. The question that follows is inevitable. If the stage is revealed, if the dreamer is awake, how then shall you live? Every truth worth remembering has been hidden in a story. This is not because the truth is too fragile to speak plainly, but because the mind, when confronted with raw infinity, often recoils. Stories are vessels, delicate containers in which the vastness of the ineffable can be sipped rather than drowned in all at once. And so, the one realization that collapses the Matrix has been told and retold for centuries under countless disguises. A seed planted in a parable, a whisper in a myth, a glint in a child's fairy tale. One such story comes from an old Sufi teaching. It tells of a king who, restless in his palace, began to dream each night of wandering the streets as a beggar. In the dream, he felt the hunger of empty days, the ache of cold nights, and the loneliness of being invisible to the world. When he awoke each morning, surrounded by gold and servants, the dream seemed to fade, but something in him was moved. One night, the dream shifted. He awoke within it. In the midst of his tattered clothes and aching bones, he remembered that he was the king, that the palace and its warmth were still his. But rather than forcing himself awake, he stayed in the dream. With that remembrance, the hunger was bearable, the cold softened, and the loneliness vanished, for he knew it was all a passing play. This is the dreamer awakening inside the dream, the very heart of collapsing the Matrix. Another tale comes from the Zen tradition, where a monk approaches his master in despair. "Master," he says, I feel trapped in this endless cycle of birth and death, of suffering and joy, as if I am a moth forever circling the same flame. The master pours him tea, so slowly and deliberately that the monk becomes restless. "You are not the moth," the master finally says. "You are the flame." In that moment, the monk's perception shifts, not because he has been given new information, but because the metaphor bypasses the mind's defenses, slipping the truth directly into his awareness. He sees that he has been identifying with the one who moves through the illusion, rather than the light in which the illusion appears. Perhaps one of the most enduring symbolic narratives is the Platonic allegory of the cave. Prisoners are chained from birth in a dark cavern, able only to see shadows cast on a wall before them. These shadows are their entire world. Then one prisoner is freed, led outside, and shown the true source of light, the sun. At first, the brilliance blinds him, and he longs for the familiar darkness. But in time, he comes to see that the shadows were never reality, only a distorted echo of it. And yet, when he returns to the cave to tell the others, they mock him, for to them, the shadows are still truth. The matrix is that cave, and the one realization is the moment you turn and see the fire for yourself. There is also the Gnostic myth of Sophia, divine wisdom personified, who descends into the realm of form, becoming entangled in matter and forgetting her origin. In her amnesia, she experiences the struggles and limitations of human existence. But fragments of memory return, glimmers of her luminous origin, and through these sparks, she begins to awaken. Her journey mirrors our own, consciousness descending into limitation, playing the game so well it forgets it is a game, and then, through some divine trigger, remembering again. The collapse of the matrix is Sophia's awakening within us. And then there is the story, less myth and more quantum parable, told by modern physicists who discover that the observer is inseparable from what is observed. In the double-slit experiment, particles behave differently depending on whether they are watched. The universe, it seems, is responsive, alive to awareness. This too is a kind of symbolic narrative, one written in the language of science rather than scripture, but pointing to the same truth. Reality is not an objective stage upon which you stand. It is a co-creation, a dance between perception and the infinite potential from which all forms arise. These stories are not meant to replace direct experience. They are fingers pointing to the moon, mirrors reflecting the shape of something your own soul already knows. The point is not to memorize them, but to feel the thread that runs through them, the reminder that the world you see is not all there is, that behind the shifting images is a presence that is constant, infinite, and unbound. When you sense that presence, even for a moment, the matrix begins to dissolve, not in some dramatic explosion, but like mist evaporating in the morning sun. The deeper truth these narratives hint at is paradoxical. The matrix is both the veil and the revelation. It hides the infinite by disguising it as the finite, yet it also provides the very contrast needed for the infinite to be recognized. Without the play of shadows, light would be invisible. Without the dream, there would be no awakening. This is why many of the ancient teachings spoke not of destroying the illusion, but of seeing through it, living within it without being bound by it. In this way, the one realization is not an endpoint, but a shift in relationship. You may still walk through the streets of the cave, still dream the king's dream of being a beggar, still play the role of the moth circling the flame, but you do so knowing what you are. The shadows become art, the dream becomes lucid, and the flame becomes not an object of longing, but your own luminous essence shining through every moment. To collapse the matrix within your perception is not to vanish from the world, nor is it to retreat into the high clouds of abstraction. It is to remain here, in the familiar streets and under the same sky, but with a radically transformed way of moving through it. This is where the realization stops being an intoxicating idea and becomes a living, breathing presence in the marrow of your life. It is one thing to glimpse the illusion in a moment of mystical clarity. It is another to carry that clarity into Monday morning traffic, into conversations with your family, into the quiet, private struggles that unfold when no one is watching. The first shift that occurs is in the weight of the world upon you. Where once events, opinions, and circumstances felt as if they pressed against you with absolute authority, they now appear more like shapes in water, still moving, still sometimes turbulent, but without the crushing solidity you once assumed. If reality is not a fixed stage, but a malleable projection within your awareness, then even the most unchangeable aspects of your life are less like prison walls and more like painted scenery. This understanding does not mean that pain vanishes or that challenges dissolve. Rather, it means that these experiences are no longer final verdicts. They are scenes in a play, and scenes can change. This shift naturally alters how you respond to conflict. When someone attacks you with words or actions, the reflex of immediate defense or retaliation begins to loosen. You start to see the attack for what it truly is, a pattern in the dream, a wave on the surface of the ocean. You realize that the one they are attacking is not the totality of you, but a role you are playing. From this perspective, compassion often arises, not out of moral duty, but from the recognition that they too are moving within the matrix, convinced of its solidity, unaware of their own role as dreamer. In your work, the implications are profound. Tasks that once felt suffocating may reveal hidden layers of meaning, not because the tasks themselves change, but because your relationship to them shifts. You begin to notice that what drains you is not the action itself, but the web of interpretations, fears, and expectations woven around it. Freed from these, even the simplest act can become luminous. Washing dishes, answering an email, or walking to the corner store can feel imbued with the same presence as sitting in meditation or standing at a mountaintop. Relationships, too, transform under the light of this realization. The roles of parent, partner, friend, colleague become less rigid. You begin to engage with people not merely as characters fulfilling a script in your story, but as fellow dreamers navigating their own labyrinth of perceptions. You might still play your part, but you do so with the awareness that beneath the roles is a shared field of being, one consciousness wearing countless faces. This recognition often softens judgment and deepens connection. Perhaps the most unexpected implication is the subtle liberation from time. The matrix thrives on the linear story. You were born, you live, you will die. Your value is tied to where you are along this line, what you've achieved, what you've yet to do. But once you see reality as arising within you rather than existing independently out there, time itself begins to lose its grip. Moments feel less like beads strung on a thread and more like facets of a single jewel, each one complete, each one accessible in its own way. In this spaciousness, the urgency that once drove you to chase or flee begins to dissolve, replaced by a grounded sense of enoughness in the now. Of course, the matrix will still try to pull you back into its gravity. Bills must be paid, laws obeyed, human bodies cared for. But the difference is that these no longer define the boundaries of what is possible. You might choose to follow the rules in certain arenas, just as a lucid dreamer might still walk along the dream street rather than flying off into the clouds, not because you have forgotten your power, but because you are choosing to experience this particular flavor of reality. Integrating this awareness does not mean abandoning ambition or retreating into passive detachment. Instead, it means that your actions are less about escaping or securing and more about expressing. You create not because you must prove your worth, but because the act of creating is an extension of the infinite playing through you. You help others not out of obligation, but because you recognize them as yourself. You face challenges not as assaults to be feared, but as puzzles woven into the dream for the joy of their solving. And while the experience of the matrix may still contain sorrow, injustice, and uncertainty, your relationship to these changes. You see them less as evidence of a broken world and more as currents in a vast and mysterious ocean. Currents that can shift, merge, and dissolve in ways the mind cannot always predict. Even grief becomes a kind of holy weather, moving through the same sky that holds the sunlight. Practical integration is not about maintaining a constant state of mystical bliss. It is about remembering, in the midst of the noise, that the noise is not the whole of you. It is about returning, again and again, to the simple truth that you are not merely a figure moving within reality. You are the field in which reality moves. And from that knowing, each choice, each breath, becomes part of the ongoing collapse of the matrix within you. There comes a moment in every seeker's path when the road no longer stretches ahead in a straight, predictable line. Instead, it opens outward in all directions, like a vast horizon with no fences, no map, and no single destination. This is the landscape you step into when the matrix collapses within you. It is not a physical shattering, no earthquake or thunderclap, but a quiet, steady unbinding. The walls you thought were stone dissolve into mist. The limits you thought were absolute reveal themselves as chalk lines fading in the rain. What remains is a freedom so vast it can feel almost unbearable, because now the next step is yours to choose. This is the paradox. Awakening does not hand you a finished script. It returns the pen to your hand. You are no longer the prisoner condemned to recite lines written before you were born. You are the playwright, the actor, the stage, and even the invisible presence in the audience watching it all unfold. Every moment becomes an opportunity to paint a new scene, to write a new dialogue, to explore the endless permutations of what it means to be alive. But with that freedom comes the responsibility to live in alignment with what you now know, to embody the truth that you are both the dreamer and the dream. The collapse of the matrix is not the end of illusion, but the end of your enslavement to it. You still walk through cities, speak in languages, use money, and navigate the countless systems of human society. The difference is that you do so with your eyes open. You know that the buildings are not as solid as they seem, that the rules are stories sustained by agreement, that even time and identity are costumes draped over something eternal. You can engage with these constructs without being consumed by them, much like a lucid dreamer who dances through a dream, knowing it is a dream. And here lies the transformational call. To live awake is not to withdraw from the world, but to infuse it with the awareness you have touched. It is to let your words carry the resonance of the infinite, to let your actions reflect the freedom you have tasted, to let your very presence remind others, whether they realize it or not, that there is more to this life than meets the eye. The greatest gift you can offer is not convincing others of a philosophy, but embodying a way of being that subtly stirs their own remembrance. Do not wait for the world to validate your awakening. The matrix will not applaud when you step beyond its grip. It will often tempt you to return, to slip back into the comfort of the familiar dream. But each time you choose to stay awake, to respond from clarity instead of habit, to see the light in another instead of their shadow, you strengthen the bridge between the infinite and the finite. You become a living portal, a seam in the fabric of the dream through which others might glimpse what lies beyond. Understand that this is not a solitary victory. The collapse of the matrix within you ripples outward. It subtly alters the frequency of your interactions, your creations, your mere existence. You may never see the full impact of this shift, but it will be there, weaving through the lives you touch, carrying forward into moments and generations far beyond your own. Awakening is both deeply personal and profoundly collective. It is the remembering of the self that transcends every individual self. And so, I leave you with this. Stand at the edge of the stage and look beyond the curtain. See the lights, the ropes, the faces in the crowd, and then see beyond even that, to the endless expanse from which the entire theatre was born. Know that you are not merely inside the performance, but that the performance is arising within you. Let this knowing not make you aloof or detached, but deeply engaged, alive to every texture of the dream while never forgetting the dreamer. The matrix collapses not in a single dramatic instant, but in each choice to see clearly, to act from freedom, to love without the conditions that the dream demands. It collapses when you stop waiting for permission to be who you already are. It collapses when you remember, again and again, that nothing in the play can diminish the vastness of the stage on which it unfolds. And when you live from that remembrance, you are no longer merely surviving in the dream. You are creating within it, shaping it, dancing through it with the lightness of one who knows they cannot be lost. Now, step forward. Let your life be the living proof of the truth you have seen, not by proclaiming it from rooftops, but by walking it, breathing it, and quietly radiating it in every interaction. For once you have seen beyond the curtain, there is no going back, not because you are forbidden to, but because you have tasted what it means to be free, and that taste is the beginning of everything.